Inside a tomb sealed for over 3,000 years, archaeologists found something strange sitting beside the golden mask of a teenage god king. Not weapons, not jewels, 10 gallons of patchouli oil, packed carefully enough to survive 3 millennia in the dark. Tutankhamun ruled Egypt at 17. He was worshipped as a living god, dressed in gold, and buried with enough treasure to fund a small war. And by the evidence in his own tomb, he almost certainly had acne. That should sound absurd. A pharaoh, a god on earth, fighting the exact same battle a teenager fights in a bathroom mirror tonight. But it's true, and it's the first thread in a story far stranger than a skincare routine. Because acne isn't a modern condition at all. It's one of the oldest diseases we've ever managed to name, blame, mistranslate, and, eventually, almost cure by accident. And somewhere in that 3,000-year chain, there's a discovery that suggests acne might not be a natural part of growing up at all. So here's the real question. If this disease has haunted humans since the pyramids, why does an entire village on the other side of the world today have 0 cases of it? Not fewer. 0. We'll get there. But first, Egypt. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts on Earth, dates to around 1550 BC. Inside it, physicians describe a condition called acute, boils, pustules, inflamed also gave us a word, acme, meaning peak or point. It described the eruption itself, and, fittingly, the peak of adolescence when it tends to strike hardest. That word would travel for centuries, and somewhere along the way, it would quietly change. Rome inherited the Greek understanding, and Roman doctors treated it with a certain aristocratic disdain. The physician Celsus, writing in his medical encyclopedia around the 1st century AD, dismissed skin blemishes as barely worth a doctor's time, almost a waste of time, in his own words, before grudgingly admitting that women simply wouldn't stop asking for treatment. Rome's actual remedy of choice was blunt: bathe in mineral springs laced with sulfur, hoping the pores would loosen and drain. A Roman physician named Cassius, writing in the 3rd century, noticed the same pattern Hippocrates had circled centuries earlier. This condition clustered around puberty. He gave it a name tied directly to that stage of life: Akmas, the peak. For roughly 500 more years, that's where the word stayed. Acme, peak, point. Then, in the 6th century AD, a Byzantine court physician named Aetius of Amida wrote it down differently. Not acme, acne. One letter added, quietly, into the medical record, the first known use of the word we still use today. For a long time, historians assumed that N was simply a copying error, a scribe's slip, repeated so often across manuscripts that it calcified into medical fact. It's a satisfying theory. A disease that's plagued humanity for 3,000 years, named by a typo nobody bothered to correct. But a closer look at the surviving manuscripts complicates that story. When a historian cross-checked 6 of the earliest surviving editions of Aetius's work, 5 of them used acne, not acme. Only one used the version everyone assumed was the correct original, which means the mistake theory might itself be the mistake. We may never know for certain whether acne was an error that stuck, or a deliberate change nobody bothered to explain. Either way, the word has now outlived every civilization that argued over its spelling. Here's where it gets personal, because none of this stayed locked in the ancient world. If you've ever caught your own reflection under bathroom lighting and flinched, you've felt exactly what a Roman teenager felt bathing in sulfur water, or what a young pharaoh felt reaching for a jar of imported oil. The disease hasn't changed. Only the excuses have. For roughly the next 1,300 years, almost nothing changed medically. Physicians still didn't know what caused these eruptions. They knew what to smear on them: honey, sulfur, herbal poultices. But the actual mechanism stayed a total mystery straight through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. The real breakthrough wouldn't come from a monarch's court, a monastery, or a university lecture hall. It would come from a prison, swellings on the skin. Their remedy was honey mixed with animal fat, smeared directly onto the face. It wasn't nothing. Honey has real antibacterial properties, something Egyptian physicians couldn't have explained, but clearly noticed worked. Not every Egyptian belief was so grounded. Some held that these blemishes were punishment for lying. Tell a lie, and your own face would betray you. Imagine being a teenager under that belief system. Every new blemish wasn't just embarrassing, it was evidence. The Greeks inherited the disease and gave it its first real intellectual attention. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, documented these eruptions under the term ionthos. Aristotle went further, studying the condition specifically in adolescence and describing it in detail nearly 24 centuries before dermatology existed as a field, the Greeks. In 1964, an outbreak of athlete's foot swept through Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. A dermatologist named Albert Kligman was brought in to help, and what he saw changed the direction of his entire career. "All I saw before me was acres of skin," he later said. "It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time." That sentence should unsettle you. It should. Over the following years, Kligman ran a series of experiments on inmates, the majority of them black men, incarcerated and without meaningful power to refuse. He tested a derivative of vitamin A on their skin, studying how it affected everything from scarring to acne. The methods were, by any modern ethical standard, indefensible. But the underlying chemical discovery was real. Kligman found that this vitamin A derivative, retinoic acid, could clear stubborn acne by speeding up how skin cells shed, keeping pores from clogging in the first place. In 1971, that compound was approved for acne treatment under the name Retin A. It's still prescribed today, in updated forms, to millions of people who have no idea the medicine in their bathroom cabinet has roots in a Philadelphia prison cell. Progress and exploitation, tangled together in the same discovery. That's not a comfortable fact. It's simply the true one. So what was actually happening under the skin this whole time? The mechanism nobody from Hippocrates to Kligman fully understood until modern biology caught up. Picture a single pore on your face. It killed nothing to sit there quietly for most of your life. Then puberty arrives, and androgens, the same hormones responsible for the deepening voice and body hair, flood the bloodstream. Those hormones supercharge the oil glands attached to each hair follicle. The glands respond by pumping out excess sebum. Dead skin cells that would normally shed cleanly instead stick together inside the follicle, forming a plug. Oil builds up behind that plug with nowhere to go. And a bacterium that lives harmlessly on almost everyone's skin, now called Cutibacterium acnes, finds the trapped, oxygen-starved environment behind the plug irresistible. It multiplies, the immune system notices, and it doesn't multiply quietly, and the result's a red, inflamed pimple. One clogged pore, one hormone surge, one opportunistic bacterium, 3,000 years of confused physicians, and the actual mechanism turns out to be almost mechanical in its simplicity. Except it doesn't explain everything. Because if this is simply what puberty does to human skin, universally, unavoidably, biologically, then acne should exist everywhere humans exist. It doesn't. In 2002, a research team led by Colorado State University scientist Lauren Cordain traveled to two of the most isolated, non-industrialized populations left on Earth, the Kitavan Islanders of Papua New Guinea and the Aceh, a hunter-gatherer people in Paraguay. Together, researchers examined the skin of more than 1,300 people, including hundreds of teenagers moving through exactly the hormonal chaos of puberty that produces acne everywhere else on the planet. They found 0 cases, not a handful, not a mild minority. 0 out of 1,300 examinations, across two populations that share no recent genetic ancestry. Compare that to Western nations, where acne affects somewhere between 79 and 95% of teenagers. The Kitavans and the Aceh have the same hormones, the same follicles, the same bacteria living quietly on their skin. What they don't have is a Western diet. The refined sugar, the processed grain, the dairy, the sheer glycemic load of a modern supermarket shelf. Their meals run on fish, root vegetables, wild game, and foraged fruit, food that doesn't spike insulin the way a slice of white bread does. And insulin, it turns out, is one of the strongest known triggers for the exact hormonal cascade that clogs a pore in the first place. Genetics didn't explain that gap. Environment did. Which means the disease that once marked out kings, pharaohs, and prisoners as equally, universally human, the one condition that seemed to spare no one, regardless of power or status, turns out to be something else entirely. Not an unavoidable tax on being a teenager, a consequence of the specific world so much of humanity chose to build. Somewhere in that sealed Egyptian tomb, 10 gallons of patchouli oil sat waiting for a boy king who never got to grow out of his own skin troubles. He had gold, armies, and the worship of an entire kingdom, and none of it could do what a hunter-gatherer village on a Pacific island manages for free, without a single doctor, clear skin, simply by eating differently. 3,000 years of honey, sulfur, prayer, prison experiments, and prescription creams, chasing a cure for something that, for some humans, was never inevitable to begin with. If any of this sounds familiar, from a mirror, a medicine cabinet, or a memory of your own worst breakout, you're not imagining a modern curse. You're standing in the same line as a pharaoh, a Roman senator's daughter, and a Byzantine court physician's confused patients, all reaching for the same answer nobody fully had until a few decades ago. The next documentary on this channel picks up right where the body's chemistry gets even stranger. So if this kind of story pulled you in, stick around.